Thank you for everyone being here, and feel free to fall asleep while I'm talking. I'm not going to take offense. It's the normal thing at Burning Man, I think. So, my name is John Dalton, and I am a retired Navy SEAL. Like she said, the talk today is about my healing journey. I used to categorize my life in two ways: pre 9/11 and post 9/11, and now I also categorize it as pre-psychedelic and post-psychedelic. So I was a Navy SEAL for 23 years. I joined up in 1995 and was going to just do the SEAL thing for 6 years. In fact, when I joined up to go down to South America to run counter-drug, counter-narcotic operations. So don't worry, nobody has to leave. I'm not that guy anymore, that's for sure. So, but I was running counter-drug missions down in South America with foreign special operations units, and was going to get out, just do 6 years, get out and go do my own thing in the civilian world again, and then 9/11 happened. And so when 9/11 happened, that changed everything for me. Everything that I had trained up for, everything that I had focused my entire being at, was now in a situation I could apply highly specialized tools and techniques and procedures and practices that I was trained, that I learned as a SEAL in the global war on terror, which was a lot more effective than the war on drugs, as we all know. So, and so I did that, and I deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq 11 times. I did 11 combat deployments overseas. That was all voluntary. There was, the government doesn't make you do that many deployments if you don't like what you're doing, and I did. So along the way, I had about 7 traumatic brain injuries, which later, significantly impacted me. One of the things that my medical record says that turned out to be a lot more insidious than even the 7 traumatic brain injuries was the thousands of subconcussive events that I received. So these are not traumatic brain injuries, they're less than a traumatic brain injury, and yet when you have that many, as we're now seeing, it's doing 2 different things. One is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's what we see with NFL players, boxers. It's why we see that high suicide rate in professional high-impact sports, and it's also why we see a suicide rate that's off the charts in special operations, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I had a really good time with what I was doing. I did lose somewhere around 40 brothers in combat-related deaths, and so that was hard. There were highs and lows throughout my career. I did some of the most amazing things that I could have ever dreamed that I would do. Some of the most high risk, high adventure, high return in terms of satisfaction and quality of life, and seeing that I was making an impact on foreign policy. These were things that mattered to me. They were kind of like the essence of my being at the time. And yet, I was part of anybody ever heard of the movie Lone Survivor, the book Lone Survivor? A guy named Marcus Luttrell, he was part of a special reconnaissance mission that was in Afghanistan that got compromised by the Taliban. And the Taliban was severely overrunning them, and they brought in it's called a quick reaction force. Quick reaction force is another helicopter filled with other SEALs to come in and rescue those guys and pull them off of that hostile environment. And as that helicopter was coming in, it was filled with guys I knew. an RPG struck that helicopter, brought it into the ground on the side of a mountain in the Konar region, which is one of the most hostile, aggressive, hostile meaning environmentally, it was one of the most aggressive. It's like the Eastern Sierra Mountains, if anybody goes up into there. And everybody was dead. Everyone was dead, but we didn't know. And so you don't, until you can actually identify every single body, you search like everyone's alive. And so my team, which was sitting in Bagram at the time, got spun up. And we went out there because now not only were our brothers on the ground getting ambushed, but I knew we lost a bunch of people. We flew in to one of the most hostile environments in Afghanistan at the time. Immediately started conducting what we call a combat search and rescue, where we're trying to rescue everybody on the ground, find them. And what was initially a combat search and rescue quickly turned into what's called a recovery mission. Recovery mission meaning that you're not rescuing mortal souls, you're recovering bodies. And so there was one, and again, a guy named Marcus Luttrell, if you ever seen the movie Lone Survivor, or the book, that's about the mission that I'm explaining to you right now. And this part isn't in the book and in the movie because it's the part where we were tracking everybody down and rescuing everybody. And it was the one time that I've pulled bodies off of battlefields before, but at this point we pulled something like 17 bodies of guys I knew. And some of these body bags that we were taking were, they might have weighed 15 pounds because that's all that you could find. And so these things impact, it impacts your psyche, it impacts your who you are. And at the time, the way that you operate in this kind of environment, and especially when you're doing it as a career, is you close down your emotional aperture. And so these things, they matter, but they don't, even though they're people guys, brothers that I went to school with and trained with, had beers with, I got the job done, and then you keep on going the next day, and in this particular case, it was 7 straight days with no sleep, and because you have to be sharp, you can't let that emotional trauma, you can't let that trauma impact your decision-making factors. You can't let that cause you to be distracted and distraught, and then not understand your environmental awareness. And so you compartmentalize that, right? We've all heard that, compartmentalization. And that's actually a really good tool when used properly. And in the SEAL teams, I was really trained well on how to compartmentalize. And I place no responsibility on the Department of Defense or on the SEAL teams in terms of being my emotional babysitter. But the one thing that you don't get kind of trained up for so much is how to uncompartmentalize that stuff. And doing it like I did as a career, there wasn't really an opportunity. You don't just simply, okay, now you mourn when your brothers and sisters get killed, and then you put that away, and twice a year usually, you memorialize it. Once on Memorial Day, and then another day, usually that's the anniversary of their death. And other than that, you're done with it. And that's how we can be so highly effective. So I did that. And again, I loved my job. I loved my career. And I am getting ready to retire around 2018. I transferred to Fallon, Nevada, and Reno. I ran a school out there. And I joke to the guys I know that I left the SEAL team I was at. I left that place like my hair was on fire because they diagnosed me at one point with what's called operator syndrome, also known as operator burnout, which is obviously not a good thing. The upside to it is that you're still incredibly effective when you go forward. You just come home and you're kind of a shit show. Like, you're not a very happy person to be around. you're kind of looking forward to going back, and because your emotional aperture is closed, and you're not just like throttling and unthrottling that, it changes a little bit of who you are. It lessens that emotional bandwidth, and you're probably not. Probably wasn't as much fun to be around, except for with the brothers that I was around. In which case, we all had a fucking blast. But when it comes to being a family, because I had a family, probably not the best. So I decided to take a break, transfer out to Fallon. And anybody know where Fallon is? Right. So Fallon is a lot like right here. And so I used to joke that it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi after the Clone Wars being like, fuck this shit, I'm going to Tatooine, like the biggest armpit on the planet in the galaxy I'm going to. So, but to me it was a good place to go. I like the desert, but so I transferred out there around 2018. I'm getting ready to retire. Everything's going swimmingly except for the divorce and the destruction of that family unit that I had. Not really knowing my son that well because I was gone so much, and that impact on my relationship with him. But I just was rolling with it because, that's where my emotional aperture was working to my advantage, or at least that's what I thought. And then some things started happening. As I'm getting ready to retire, I started recognizing some things that are very atypical of my personality. I started suffering from very significant anxiety, significant depression. I didn't want to leave my house. I didn't want to go into society. I didn't even know why. It wasn't that I didn't like people. I just didn't want to. I just found myself getting stuck. Started getting bad headaches, and it was impacting me significantly, and my future started becoming very dark. I just didn't see myself around much longer. And I had lost at this point several close friends that are seals to suicide. And these individuals that I knew were some of the most high-functioning human beings you will ever meet. I mean, they blew me away. They were just in the most high-stress environment. They are sharp. They are cool. They have their wit. They're amazing. They're everything that you want somebody to be if they're going to come save your life if you're a hostage somewhere, which is what we would also do, hostage rescue. They are the guy that you want to come take care of the bad guys, throw their bodies on you until the situation is secure. That's exactly what we would do. And then take you safely away from a hostage environment. And these are the same guys that are killing themselves. Sometimes in extremely graphic ways, and sometimes in front of loved ones. In manners that, in reasons that I just couldn't understand. And nobody can. I remember a psych talking to me one time. This was, I think, when I was in denial about things like how this shit would affect me emotionally. And I think I was in denial about PTSD and stuff like that. And at one point in my life, I thought that was a weakness. I guess you'd say kind of a macho guy. And I was like, I just thought that was weakness. And I'm here to stand in front of you now and tell you that's obviously, that was wrong. And I think maybe one of the moments that I had a turning point was around 2014 when the psych told me, he's like, John, if you've been exposed to the kind of trauma you guys are exposed to, and you don't have PTSD, you are almost certainly a sociopath. And and so I was like, okay, I guess it's okay to, acknowledge that. And then when another close friend of mine, another SEAL, who retired, he had everything going for him. He had a full retirement. He was working as a contractor, but in the country, not going out of the country. He was a family man. He had a wonderful family. He had two adorable children. He had a wonderful wife, who I still stay in touch with to this day. And he drove to work, and he called his wife, he texted his wife and said he wasn't going to be able to pick the kids up from school, and that he's sorry, and he loves her very much. And he pulled a gun out, and he blew his brains out in the parking lot. And I had another guy, another friend, a brother. We rose through the SEAL teams together, from SEAL training to one SEAL team, through specialized training, going up to higher and higher level SEAL teams where there's highest levels of criteria just to get there, and they're called special missions units. And this guy, he had a high school diploma. He submitted an application to MIT Sloan School of Business based on his life experience, and they accepted him. And he, I think, got like a 4.0. This is the type of individual I'm telling you about that is a SEAL that can do these amazing things in the middle of the night, in the darkest of dark, against the evil people, successfully, and come home. And he did. Until the day that he had an anxiety attack so bad he threw himself in front of an 18-wheeler on a highway. And so I recognized some certain similarities in these guys and myself. And I started to realize, am I next? These guys, I don't know. I didn't see it coming with them. They weren't the guys that I thought, man, he's struggling. And they did that. And so I was talking to another SEAL brother of mine. He's like, John, you really should take a look at psychedelic medicine. I'll tell you my reaction. It's very much what you'd think probably of a guy that used to do counter-drug missions. I was like, fuck no. That sounds like a bunch of hippie veterans doing a bunch of hippie drugs to go get high and escape reality, right? He's like, no, dude. He's like, take a look at it. Just take a look. Okay. I respected this guy, so I did. And I started looking at the science of it. And I started looking at the studies. I looked at this the same way I would look at a target. And I would do target analysis, and I would build a concept of operations to go take that target successfully. And I looked at that with this. And I had another guy I knew, he was at the same SEAL team I was, and he had a nonprofit called Veterans Treatment Solutions. Vets. His name was Marcus Capone. And I had to be led a little bit on this. I said, he's like, hey, let me put you in touch with Marcus. Kind of put the call off. Then I did the call, and Marcus is like, look, dude, he's like, I'm gonna put you in front of the line. And so that was a big step for me. And so I started getting psychedelic coaching. So the front side of psychedelic assisted therapy, right? Before the psychedelic treatment. And so for me, this was now a guy that's not a recreational drug user. I was basically given the opportunity to go down to Mexico to do what is arguably, and some people understand this, is two of the most powerful psychedelics known to man, ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT. And as I started preparing for this, I look back on this and I understand exactly what was happening to me. I started looking for flaws in everything about this treatment. I started looking for unprofessionalism in the individuals. I was looking for a reason to not do it. Or let me change that. My ego was looking for a reason to protect itself and stay safe and keep me in this world of hurt that I was basically in. And thank goodness I had a good therapist or coach that she pointed that out. I was in denial on that. It was only until after that I recognized that was the case, but I said, okay, fuck it, I'll go do this. And I still was negative about this. I was like, I saw some people, a buddy of mine, that his wife was like, this saved his life. We thought he was gone. Now I have my husband back. And I even thought, I'm sure this was good for them, but I just don't see it working for me. But I was so down in a dark hole that I was like, fuck it, what else do I have to lose? I'll go do drugs. That's kind of where I was at with it. And I now call it medicine, but then it was drugs. But so I went down to Mexico to a place called Ambio, and I did the medicine. I did Ibogaine, and I won't get into the details on that, other than to say it definitely is not a party drug. That was no MDMA experience, that's for sure. But it was precisely what I needed. In fact, I would say that the highlights of it were, when I talk about my emotional aperture, this was the seminal moment where I realized that I had an emotional aperture and that it was closing. And I kept feeling this ominous doom closing in around me during this treatment, during this psychedelic journey. And I would work breathing exercises because that was what I was trained to do. And when I'm trained to do something, I do it because that's how I roll. And that's just part of me. And I try to come back out of it. And then I realized I started to think about three things, and I called them the Trinity. All not necessarily in this order, but my son, my dog, and my girlfriend of 7 years at the time. And I realized all of a sudden that I had this smile on my face. In the midst of this ceremony, in the midst of this like these phantoms and just ominous black darkness trying to come into me, I would think about them. It would all go away, and I'd have this beautiful smile on my face. And I recognized peace. And this was the point when I started to recognize that I could feel peace. And I could feel love. And I came out of this. I came out of this moment. I came out of the ceremony. Immediately went from the floor where I was onto a table to do Reiki. I always mispronounce that. Reiki, yeah. And then again, I'm still not like buying into all this shit, right? Like fucking energy, whatever. This old Mexican woman is doing stuff. And I'm still in the medicine. I was in the medicine for about 18 hours on this, and this was probably about 15 hours in. And I get up after she kind of like brings me back, and there's a crew of different guys that were with me. And these individuals, they had different motivations. They weren't all SEALs. There were a lot of people that have not had my life experience at all and not had the kind of drives that I would have, right? And I say this because I would have been suspicious of something that came out of this woman's mouth, except it was so on point to me so particularly on point that it brought me to tears. And she says, and I can't do the Mexican accent that she had, but John, you push yourself too hard. You push too hard. And of course, that's why I was a SEAL. I mean, I pushed the fuck out of myself. I was my own biggest critic. And I just looked at her and I broke down and I wept. Another thing that is not very common for something, for me, or at least it wasn't. Now it's a lot more common, and that's a good thing. But I walked away from that. I was still in this system reset. It was like a computer, like rebooting. I was not functioning very well, and then I fall the next day. This whole 5-MeO thing. Like, man, what is this shit? And I pulled that 5-MeO into my lungs and went away. And I remember everything that happened. And I remember coming out of that. I remember seeing at one point, as I kind of broke it down into two phases, one was this hugely powerful, connected to source, something I won't say outside Burning Man, but or at least not to legislators, but connecting to this source energy. I didn't even understand what those words meant. I'd never even heard about something like that, and yet it is exactly what I felt, plugged in. And then as it started to fade, I saw what appeared to me to be almost this primordial mass, like universal mass, and like the cloud of energy, the cloud of the universe before it actually creates a Big Bang, or like a nebula, so to speak. And I saw this spark, and I recognized in this that this was the spark of a life. And I felt this peace wash over me. And I came out of that, and I took that with me, that spark, and to this day, whenever something's hard, whenever I'm struggling, I think back to that ultimate peaceful feeling where I was witness to some sort of spark of life, however you want to define that. I got out of that, and my resting heart rate prior to going into this, one of those people that monitor that type of shit, and I was like an older car on a high idle, when it's wintertime, it started up, goes high. I was 78 resting heart rate. At SEAL 2, I had a resting heart rate in the 40s. So this was clearly, you can't lie that something's really was going wrong. Well, I woke up that next morning and my resting heart rate was down in the 50s again. I mean, it was a 20 plus difference in resting heart rate. And this had changed my life, and it saved me, and I saw a future. And most importantly, what I realized was that I had closed off my emotional aperture the way I described, and that it was time to open that. That I had all these reasons to shut off love coming in towards me or transmitting love to someone else. I realized there were all these justifications that I had, whether it was a relationship with my girlfriend, whether it was my son, whether it was my dog, who I love very much, and I recognized that I had my ego set these defense mechanisms up to prevent getting hurt, and that it was time to do away with that, that opening my emotional aperture up would allow me to feel the immense love that these three beings were giving to me, and to push that back to them. And I realized with each one of those three beings, it is entirely likely that I'm going to feel lost with them sometime in the future. And I realized that's okay. And I realized that's just one more thing that I will need to take into myself and process rather than compartmentalize. And this is when I realized that it's time to uncompartmentalize all that shit, right? All that stuff that was in me, and that's what I did. And so now I'm home, I'm in Reno, and I'm like, what do I do now? like it was awesome. And yet that there was a spark there where I realized, okay, I had to travel to Mexico to where it's legal. I had no idea about an underground. The majority of people I know nothing about an underground. They'd be nervous to go find an underground. And I had to, and also I was a rule follower at the time, and so I had to go there where it was legal, and I said, that's wrong. That is just, this is not the bill of goods that somebody had given me about psychedelics. This was not the Timothy Leary stuff that I had heard. This is not tune in, turn on, and drop out. This is tune in, turn on, and lean into society. And I love you in the back, by the way. Thank you. I love the nonverbals. Appreciate it. And I knew that this is not something to be squandered, and I knew that this is something that we shouldn't have to leave the country to do. We're going forward in time between 2022 and 2023. I lost 8 more SEAL brothers to suicide, 2 to death by alcohol. And that was in about a 16, 18 month period of time. And so I meet this gal in front of me, Kate Cotter, who was the executive director for the Sierra Psychedelic Society. She's like, John, would you mind talking to some legislators about your experience? I'm like, fuck, I don't know if I want to do that. I didn't know I've into this whole thing. And we'll fast track it a little bit, and I did, and Kate and myself and another veteran Marine named Bruno Moya, we decided to start a nonprofit 501c4 called the Nevada Coalition for Psychedelic Medicines. And the mission is to get regulated, legalized access for psychedelic assisted therapy, and then to reduce criminal penalties. As we know, psychedelics are Schedule 1 substance, highly abusive, no medical value. If you're in this tent, you know that's bullshit. And if you don't know it's bullshit, I'm here to tell you that it's bullshit. And in fact, when they talk about highly abusive, they usually interchange highly abusive and highly addictive. Same thing, right? Fentanyl, which is actually Schedule 2, is highly addictive, right? And things like ibogaine are anti-addictive, and things like psilocybin are anti-addictive. And so Kate and I got together, and we formed up this coalition, and we would talk to legislators. We had a bill called SB 242. It was originally a bill to decrim psilocybin and to do a study for MDMA. And it was a bill with good intention. We didn't write the bill. The bill had good intentions, but it was not, number one, it wasn't thought out fully in terms of is this going to work? Is this going to pass? This might pass in, Oregon or Washington or Colorado, but will this pass in Nevada? Because our culture in Nevada is different. It does have a strong libertarian slant, but it also has a lot of conservatives. And I'll say straight out that I'm probably the only conservative in this room, but I'm still a deep conservative right on. I knew I loved you. I didn't know you. Yeah. Thank you. And so, because I'm a conservative, and it's my people that are a little slow on the uptake for this stuff, right? We, by our very nature of conservative, we are not fast to change, right? And so many of us were a product of the Reagan, Nancy Reagan era, and this is your brain on drugs. I don't want to be that fucking egg. Shit. And so but I had credibility as a combat decorated SEAL. I could get into. We hired a lobbyist. We now have a team of lobbyists. We hired a lobbyist, and that lobbyist would get us in the door to conservative legislators, and Democrats as well. But Democrats were easier to sell, but also sometimes not so much. In Nevada, you could have a Democrat running a district that's full of conservatives, and that Democrat needs to really, really figure out right or wrong politics. Right? I look at politics as a dirty word to me. And decisions aren't made always for the best of society. They're sometimes made for self-preservation of the politician. And those politicians may not, even if it's a Democrat, may not want to support what you're doing if they think that their constituents are going to balk at it. So we go in, talk to Democrats, we talk to a lot of conservatives, and I got in there as a SEAL officer, and I would tell them a brief version of this story. And when I would explain the SEAL suicides, and then the suicides of all veterans, which are between, it's like 17 to 44 a day, depending on the different studies out there, which translates to 6,000 to 16,000 a year. And the one thing that conservative legislators are patriots for the most part, and they love their veterans. And if I even start to go down the road about explaining first responders, and including cops, and the PTSD and the trauma that they have, or think about a 911 dispatcher, they're not on the scene. Worse, they're listening to the scene, helpless to do anything but make a phone call or a radio call to paramedics to get out, or cops to get out, and the cops deal with that. And they deal with that in the dark of night, oftentimes, high-risk situations. And they're damaged. And they're trying to function every single day. And so I would get their attention, and we would emotionally impact them. And that's when Kate would start talking about the neuroscience behind this. Because once again, you have to meet them where they are, right? This isn't the conversations where we're going to talk about metaphysical environments or connecting with source energy. I would never say that. Is the camera going? Can we shut that off? No, just kidding. But you have to really keep this on the neuroscience with study after study. And so many of them would be like, well, I'm all for it if once they conduct some studies. And we're like, yeah, they've been doing that since the 50s. And now that we've been doing it since 2000, 2005 to now, we're doing the same studies, but we're putting people into functional MRI machines, positron emission tomography machines, EEGs, running full scope psychological or neuropsychological tests on people before, during, and after psychedelic treatments, and we're seeing the difference. And you see there's two different types out there. One, you'll never change them. They're going to just always be negative. And I would say they comprised about 15 to 20% of the people that I talked to. The other 80%, I think, they turned. And what a wonderful thing that was to see them turn. And they're like, and it could be, the conversation can be like this: look, I'm really, I'm a little dubious on this, but I want to know more. If they say that, I'm like, okay, we're good. Like, because you can't deny the science on this. And so SB 242, we turned it into a working group, the governor's psychedelic medicine working group. And we felt this was the best move for Nevada. Nevada wasn't a cultural environment where they were going to accept 1 year having nothing, no conversation, and the next year being legal. So this is giving us a 24-month period, and we're now roughly 18 months into that, where we develop the message. We socialize this both with the legislators, with the governor. We socialize it, just as importantly, more importantly, with Nevadans. And we help them understand what psychedelic medicine is, what it isn't, what psychedelic-assisted therapy is, and how safe it is, and who is a good applicant for it, right, and who's not. And we, for those of you who look at psychedelic therapy, we know that there's certain profiles. Like if you're schizophrenic, is probably this. We're not at that point yet. Bipolar, we're not at that point yet. Although they're doing studies now with people with bipolar, right now. But so we know that there's certain people who should and shouldn't. And so right now, we have neuroscientists, we have neurologists, we have the head of psychiatric associations on our team, the Nevada Psychiatric Association. We have global health experts. We have a very, very high functioning team that is putting together all the data. And just as importantly, we have a team of lobbyists that understand how to work the political nuances of everything. We have people that understand how to write bills. And then we're deploying a communication strategy where we get the word out to create cultural change. And so I'm talking about cultural change on a state level, but really what we need to do, all of us, is cultural change on a national level, right? And I'm a supporter, by the way, of changing laws on the federal level. I'm a supporter, obviously, of changing laws on the state level, and that is my primary focus. Has anybody heard recently about the FDA decision with MDMA? If you have, raise your hand. Okay, so a few of you haven't, so I'll just explain it really quickly. MDMA is a Schedule 1 also. It is largely considered to be the gold standard for PTSD treatment. These numbers might be off just slightly, but before and after, during studies, they've had 72% that no longer qualify for the definition of PTSD. And so it can technically cure PTSD, and that is a tall statement to make, and I do not make that without having done my homework first, because normally PTSD isn't cured. It's managed. It's managed with SSRIs, which is what the VA put me on first. And SSRIs don't cure. They're palliative care. They help you with the symptoms. They don't go after the core, the root cause. And I recognize that. And the quality of life, the side effects of SSRIs are awful. They're just terrible. They didn't work for me. They put me on all kinds of different ones. I quit. I was like, fuck this. And so PTSD up until these studies until using MDMA for MDMA-assisted therapy, these things were, PTSD wasn't a cure. It was treating. And so now it is. So MAPS now with a spin-off called Lycos, which is their for-profit piece, submitted to the FDA to reschedule MDMA down to Schedule 2 or 3 to allow therapists to legally use psychedelic therapy. And so the FDA on August 11th denied it. And they denied it in the face of science. And I hate the whole look at the science after COVID. You hear that all the time, but this is the truth, right? It's like the studies don't lie, study after study. And you look at Australia, who legalized it, and you look at the recent decision, was it Dutch decision? Which happened days after the FDA denied it. A Dutch decision approved it. And so, see all these other countries that are approving it, yet we denied it. And again, I'm not really a big conspiracy theorist, but when you look at some of the members that were on the original advisory committee, there was clear conflict of interest with their association with Big Pharma. And Big Pharma is not overtly doing anything here. if they're doing anything, it's insidious, and it's kind of in that dark channels behind the scenes, trying to plug in the right people to say, I don't know about that, no. And so they voted against it, and that's a major setback for us. And so this is why state legalization efforts are so critical, because we can do on a state level what they can't get their head out of our ass and do on a federal level. We look at cannabis, and we look at how roughly over 30 states have some level of legalization, whether it's full legalization, whether it's for medical use, and it's still Schedule 1, right? And even though the Biden administration said, yeah, we want to reschedule it, you're going to not see it rescheduled for several years. Sometimes rescheduling something takes upwards of 9 years. So if you wait for that to happen, people die. And it's just that simple. This is what it comes down to for someone like me. I look at risk, I look at a risk analysis, I look at the amount of people that will die without this kind of therapy available to them. And it blows my mind, but at the same time, maybe it doesn't, that a bureaucratic, overweight, unagile, bloated federal organization or agency like the FDA says, nah, we need to wait for more studies to come out. So here's what's going to happen. I told you 17 to 44 veterans a day commit suicide. That translates to 6,000 to 16,000 a year, which it's going to be at least 2 years before they repeat the phase 3 studies, which is what the FDA told Lycos to do. That is 12,000 to 32,000 veterans. And if you know veterans, you might know one. They're here today and they'll be gone tomorrow. I can tell you right now, I know that guys I know will commit suicide. It is as sure as the sun will set tonight. There are guys I know that they won't be on this planet in the next 24 months. That is not acceptable to me. That is why we have to work this on the state level. And so that's what we're doing at Nevada Coalition for Psychedelic Medicines. One other thing I'll bring up, and that's a lot of people talk about decrim, right? Decrim versus full legalization, which would be like you can go in a cannabis dispensary and buy psilocybin on a shelf, that kind of thing, or straight decrim, just decrim, where they basically drop the criminal penalties to the lowest level, and law enforcement focuses on everything else, and they don't focus on that. And in some states, that might be a choice that state decides to make. And here's why we don't look at that as the primary option in Nevada. Because of scale. Because many of us in this room have found the underground. And we've found people ceremonialists that can heal. And yet, a lot of Americans, the majority of Americans, are rule followers. They're scared of the underground, and they feel safe with that. They feel safe with knowing that there's somebody that's trained, that has a qualification. And so if you take it from the underground and you put in a regulated, legalized access model, you can then train hundreds of therapists, or nationwide thousands of therapists. And we look at what we call the 4 pillars of what we believe that, like somebody doing psychedelic therapy could have, which is different than a ceremonialist, and I'll get into that in a second. But it would be somebody that has basic medical knowledge, right? Understanding contraindications of medicines and things like that. Second would be some sort of therapeutic training, as in some sort of mental health training to understand highly complex trauma, and then psychedelic specific training to understand how to maximize benefits of psychedelics. And And then there's an understanding of ancient wisdoms and cultures, because these medicines are thousands of years old. And we would be wrong if we didn't look at the cultures that used this stuff ceremonially. And by the way, they did not use it recreationally. In fact, in some locations, in some tribes, that using this stuff recreationally would cause severe consequences. But using it ceremonially was how those villagers and those tribes would heal. And in fact, their shamans and their medicine men would face severe. They needed to know their stuff. Doing the wrong thing with the wrong people would have consequences. So we look at that as being able to mix modern therapeutic benefit, modern therapeutic modalities with something that's thousands of years old, overlaying the best principles of both. And then the last one, and this is somewhat of can be an issue with medical licensure, would be firsthand experience of the medicine. Now, that one is kind of more like a recommendation, because until we're at a place in society where a therapist is at risk of losing their license for doing something that they should never be a crime for them to do, they may not be able to do that. And that's a disadvantage to that. It's also a disadvantage that, say, a ceremonialist would not have to deal with, because they all have first-hand experience, ideally decades. And so that brings me to that second piece, the ceremonialist. So we don't call it decrim, because law enforcement gets scared about that, and law enforcement has a say-so in changing law, right? Straight up the judicial branch, right to the executive level, right to the governor, right into the governor's ear. Law enforcement can be there. And so we change our language. We call it reduced penalties. It's the same thing. Simply reducing criminality down to a civil fine. And this allows ceremonialists, those among us who have 5, 10, 20 years worth of experience, that know more about these medicines than any therapist could, unless that therapist is actually also a ceremonialist, which there's guys out there like that. And this is an opportunity also because there's some people that don't trust the medical community. And so we want to, how do you get both? How do you get both of those? We feel it's not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. It can be both. It just is in how you write law and how you get these things going from a felony offense down to an infraction, like a civil fine, where nobody's going to get arrested for having mushrooms in the closet. So that's where we're at in Nevada. And so are there any Nevadans in here? Raise your hand if you're a Nevadan. Cool. So for us Nevadans, the thing that we need to do is, this is a cultural change initiative, and so this is where every one of you can help by, and it took a lot for me to come out of the closet, right? And on this, I was petrified. Also, I was petrified that I was going to lose custody of my child if I came out and publicly testified in front of the Nevada State Legislature, which I ended up doing, or testifying in front of Congress and congressmen, which I ended up doing. And in fact, my ex-wife tried to pull custody from me because I did that. And the judge actually recognized that everything I was doing was to exercise my constitutional rights to change law. And she actually she censured my ex-wife because of that. But I was scared shitless that I would lose custody of my son. And so I recognized how hard it can be. And I come from a community where a lot of guys were like me 3 years ago, where you're just like, is this guy a whack job now? What happened to him? And so I came to recognize, like, I can't let fear, like, I can't let that shut me down. And so what I would ask of all of you is, the way we can make a change, the way all of you can make a change, is by telling your story of how you've healed from psychedelics to everyone that will listen. Everyone that will listen, because where we're going to have to be to where we can normalize psychedelics in our society in America is when we start to get this stuff legalized and we start to get education out there where people understand what this stuff is, they're not scared of it, and most importantly, when their sons, their daughters, or mothers and fathers or sisters and brothers who suffer from mental health illnesses like depression, anxiety, PTSD, sexual trauma, domestic violence, when they're healed and that parent now sees a son or a daughter who they knew was hurting inside, and now they see that person's healed, and now they recognize this is not what I thought it was. Right? Like Obi-Wan Kenobi, when he was like, these are not the droids you're looking for. It's like, these are not the drugs you're looking for. And that is how we're really going to make change. And that is how we're going to be able to normalize the use of psychedelic medicine in our society. And so that is what I ask of all of you, regardless if you're Nevada or not, because every state needs to be moving towards a legalization effort. And so I would ask of you to tell your story to people, and that's how you can help make a difference. And so that's all I got. We're running a little late, so super quick if you have any questions. If not, I'll hand this thing off. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.